it goes all the way to well-known coaches, sports scientists doing, the hypertrophy effects of hip thrusts for the glutes and transfer effects and etc. It goes deep into it, and yes, we've got to be careful.
A lot of the research coming out of the hip thrust versus squats debate is that squats are better for hypertrophy. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's right or wrong.
It's confirmation bias a lot of the time, like what we read, what we see. If we believe it, then we agree with it, right? It's whether it's fucking strength and conditioning, sports science, hypertrophy, fat loss, whether it's fucking politics. You know what I mean? Like, it's all bias confirmation.
We're certainly in the world now where things are becoming more tribal. So, Steve, I've had some good feedback on the show. People have missed you. So I think everyone's glad to have you back. How you been?
Very well. It's good to hear. Yeah, I've been good, mate. I've been good. Who's been giving you that feedback?
Mainly the people in Andy's gym, so your mates. But still, I would still take that as a win.
Wait, hold up. So you're training there now, yeah?
I'm training myself there now,
yeah. Yeah. That's what I mean. I know you're not a one-to-one personal trainer anymore, big time now. But you're training in their gym, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
I will shout them out though. Not this is not Modern Muscle's fault, but Active Zone in a slightly negative way. They are the worst opening hours ever.
What time are they open and closing?
So 6 o'clock in the morning, which is fine, but then they close at 6 p.m. on a Friday and 2 p.m. on a Saturday, Sunday. Sunday, fair enough.
Okay, so you don't get gym access card. You don't get a card to get in whenever you want.
No.
I need to change that because, yeah.
And I'm spoiled. I've been spoiled for the last, 15 years about having private PT studios when I've got the keys and I can go in when I want. And now I'm going to have to, get used to opening hours like a normal person. And I'm such a millennial and getting really frustrated that the gym is not bowing down to me and my work schedule needs. What a bunch of pricks.
Privilege. Typical privilege. Well, that's just it sounds crazy to think most gyms across the world, even, private training studios, you get access cards in it so you can get in when you want, you know what I mean? As a trainer, as a customer, I think they're a bit behind and, not for me to give business advice to these gyms, but,
I always think with this thing, I know this is not our main topic of the day, but I think it's an interesting side topic. But I've always worked out what's the legality of opening up a 24-hour gym. Because I knew, we knew when we were working at UP that, again, this might just be hearsay and scare tactics, but people, you couldn't come in when you didn't have your trainer. Fair enough. It's an exclusive high-end PT facility. But no, people don't train on their own. Because if they hurt themselves, it's us that get in trouble. Yet in this 24-hour gym, you're not going to have staff in 24 hours a day. Is it just as simple as put it in the terms and conditions? I don't think I'd want to touch a 24-hour gym with a barge pole as a manager.
Literally put it in the terms and conditions into a contract. When you're here, you're at your own risk. Sign the waiver, sign the PARQ, health questionnaire to protect us. Bish bosh, go. That's it. You do your induction to know that you're safe going around the equipment. That's it. You know what I mean?
You say that though, and I thought it would be that simple. Yeah, if you've been into I've been into the gym here in the UK, which is I don't know if you've been to one you've been back, but they lock off the free weights area after about 9-10 o'clock at night. So there obviously is an element of concern because it becomes a resistance machine gym after a certain time.
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of that. I didn't know that they do that. That sounds crazy.
Yeah, but maybe I just don't want to start with the gym, but I just wouldn't want to touch them with the barge pole. I don't want someone to get hurt in my gym. It'd be at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I get called. I'm like, look, someone's been crushed by a squat rack. I know you're not legally responsible because they signed the terms, but you got to come in and sort this shit.
Yeah, fuck, man. Those are the risks that you take, innit, for having businesses. But so you were going to big up more than Muscle and give Active Zone a bit of shit, basically.
It's 100%. Those boys, all the trainers in that gym are good. And for a small little gym that's attached to a college, it's pretty decent.
Yeah, it's not bad, man. It's not bad. I mean, some of them guys have been there for a while now, years. Like Andy, now they've been there a long time, and they got their coaches working for them. They're building a good little team and that. Yeah, man,
Hmm.
they're doing well. They're doing really well.
So, going on to our main topic of today, we're going to be talking about. Well, it was one of these things that was probably the pop culture hit probably about a month ago, but I still think it's interesting to have this conversation, and that is length and range work actually more hypertrophic? This is something that everyone was talking about for a certain period of time. That people are always like everything, right?
Mm.
People hear a study, and all of a sudden they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and we have people saying, "Why do any short and range stuff? Ignore length and range stuff. Never ever reverse band anything now because it takes away from the length and range stuff." So I want to go into those topics and more. But before we delve into the individual stuff of it, what have you heard about this topic, and what do you think of this term that length and range is the way forward?
I think like with anything in training, nutrition, I don't want to say it, but it does all depend, innit? It depends on the individual. It depends on the goal, the experience level, the injuries, all different things. And like the reality is, the main mechanism of building muscle tissue, getting stacked, getting hench, is, in my opinion, mechanical tension. Right? That's like the main mechanism, right? Mechanical tension, lifting heavy shit. And the more you can do that, whether it's through reps, sets, load, variations, you're going to build muscle tissue. Yeah. But the caveat is that, not all exercises are created equal, not all ranges of motion are created equal. So, you create different amounts of mechanical tension on different things. And that's why understanding, if you're a coach, that's why understanding um, muscles, maybe a little bit of strength curves, like simple biomechanics, maybe understanding insertions, origins of, muscles, etc., is so important. So that if you have an understanding of these movements and exercises and how muscles work, then I think you can choose how to build muscle tissue and how to apply this mechanical tension that's best for the client.
This is why I refrain from ever calling myself evidence based.
Yeah.
Like Luke Lehman said, he's not evidence based, evidence informed. I quite like that.
Yeah,
But
that's nice.
I say that I give my coaches almost like a systems or a process way of thinking, right? If you can think in sound principles around rather than sound bites, you can then start looking at studies for the flaws and the strengths that they have. The problem is these days, and again, I'm not as skilled as I used to be, but people don't know how to read studies. So either they read a study, misinterpret it, and then change the whole practice based off it, or even worse, their favorite fitness influencer says X equals Y, so they also believe X equals Y, because they don't know enough of how the process of whatever they're trying to do, fat loss, muscle gain, whatever, works enough to be able to think critically themselves. Yeah. So you mentioned learning anatomy, learning strength curves, learning resistance profiles, learning what mechanical tension is. You'd be amazed how many coaches I go, what are the three drivers of hypertrophy? And they don't know them. And I'm sure, I say this now all the time, people are probably sick of it, but I'm sure that if I gave someone a fantastic instruction manual how to remove a kidney, right, a surgeon wouldn't technically need to know the rest of the body, but I'd really like it if they did. So I think when you look at this, and this can go off in a few different tangents and different directions, but when people see this, they'll go, okay, length and range work is more hypertrophic. And then you don't look at what the flaws of the study are, for one. So you look at studies that I've seen anyway. I'm sure there are better ones than what I've read, but all of them, they're not just length and range partials on their own. It's almost like they'll do a set of leg curls and they'll finish with more length and partials compared to the group that finished before the need for the extra length and partials. So it was a normal set plus length and partials. And I'm like, well, okay, so it could be that the length and range work created more hypertrophy, or it could be because you took a set closer to failure And in turn, as you said, created more mechanical tension. That created hypertrophy. Like, what have you read in this area research-wise? And is there anything that strikes out to you as either this is a bit of a flaw, or strikes out to you actually there's some legitimacy in this?
Well, first of all, just going off what you said, like, when studies are conducted like that, it's terrible. You know what I mean? There's too many variables, and the whole point of a good quality study is controlling as many of those variables as possible. Yeah. So, and there's obviously issues in it with people that pay for the study, people that are doing the study. Do they have a bias, right? They want to maybe prove, that these lengthened positions work. So they could bias the study and choose a method that they know will look superior to something else. You know what I mean? And whether they know that or not, there's still a bias to why they chose to do that study and why they chose to do these methods and stuff, right? So there's always a bias thing to the studies that are getting done. The stuff I've looked at, like a comparison, right? Like there's a study from University of Tampa. They looked at building muscle tissue in stretched positions. So they took a muscle to complete failure. I think it was a bicep curl. And they took on an incline dumbbell curl. That I think they took the muscle to complete failure, and then they hold the bottom stretch position for 30 seconds. And they said, okay, this can improve muscle growth by up to 40, 50% or something, which sounds crazy. Like, can it actually improve muscle gains by 50%? We know that you don't build muscle in one workout. It's over a long period of time, right? So that's, can stretching a muscle when it's being worked maximally, does it have an effect? And who knows? You know what I mean? That's the thing, isn't it? Who knows? But I think overall, if you compare training a muscle in its shortened position to its lengthened position, I would think most of the research would show that training those muscles in lengthened states are better than shortened positions.
Why so, in your opinion?
I'm not too sure. I think there's we know that, when a muscle is in its stretched position, it's in its weakest position. That could be one thing, so, you're going to create more trauma, more tension, more, you're going to fuck it up in its weakest position. I think that could help. But then it's, no understanding also the difference between, a lengthened muscle and a stretched muscle, right? Like there's a difference between the two. So, things like that is what people get a little bit confused with, I think, as well. It's quite basic.
That's an interesting thing, the difference between a lengthened muscle and a stretched muscle, because again, the mechanical tension being that big driving factor, tension being the key word. Yeah. I can passively stretch a muscle. So that tension, and again, like, there's some people who go, well, yeah, obviously. And they go, yes, obviously. But at the same time, do the researchers who aren't personal trainers and the clients that they probably just picked off the street for this study, are these people do they know the difference? Like we've all seen, like any good coach has walked into a general population gym, a commercial gym, and seen coaches train their clients with no control, bounce at the bottom, just put a load on the bar, compared to slow, controlled, mastering end ranges. So when you compare the two, well, a guy in a lab coat ain't going to know more than the average coach. And the average coach doesn't necessarily know this. So while it might be obvious to someone listening to this that, yes, obviously it makes a difference between like that they're controlling it. Well, if the study doesn't think that, or the study doesn't take that into consideration, then there's now going to be flaws in this study. So even though you understand that problem, when you hear the research and you hear X influencer go, oh, length of range work is the best, you immediately take it in with also knowing that these flaws are there. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, like the difference between stretch and tension.
Yeah, I mean, like it's confirmation bias a lot of the time, like, what we read, what we see, if we believe it, then we agree with it, right? It's whether it's fucking strength and conditioning, sports science, hypertrophy, fat loss, whether it's fucking politics, you know what I mean? Like it's all bias confirmation. There's a referendum going on here at the moment in Australia on the indigenous people, whether to give them what they're going to call the voice. So at the moment, the indigenous community, the Aboriginals, they don't have a voice in Parliament. They don't really have any rights in Parliament on what goes down for their communities, right? But at the moment, they have a 10-year less life expectancy than everyone else, right? So, you know, they're the minority. Do you know much about Indigenous here?
No, I don't know.
Okay, so it's basically the people that own the land, right? Before Western world came and, like, you know, raped them and killing them and stuff like that, right? So I think it was only 60s or 70s they were still classified as like flora, or I don't know the word for it, but like, you know, wild plants and flowers, which means that if you have a gun license, you can kill them if you're on your property.
Jesus Christ.
But anyway, I don't want to get into that sort of shit, yeah? But what I'm trying to say is that there's a referendum going down where whether everyone has to vote, right? It's compulsory to vote in Australia, all right? And yet it's compulsory to vote for this thing. It's the first time I've had to vote because I'm a citizen now. So I have to vote. Yes or no? Should we give them a voice in government? Yes or no? Obviously, leaflet came through the door, whole book on it, yeah? Yes, no. All the yeses, boom, 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 boom. You know, equal rights. Give them an opportunity. They know what's best for them. Blah blah blah. And then no is like, oh, they're gonna start taking advantage of, you know, this and that, this and that. And one of the things on no says, if you're not sure, vote no. And I was just like, well, I kind of want to vote yes, but if I was not sure, it's now telling me that I have to vote no. So I said to someone, what are you going to vote? And they said, I'm going to vote no because of this, this, this. They said, what are you going to vote, Steve? I said, I'm not too sure. That person straight away jumped on it and said, well, if you're unsure, you have to vote no. My point being on this little topic is that that's confirmation bias at its finest.
Yeah.
That's what they believe. But what I said, if I'm not sure, why can't I vote yes? I hope that makes sense, what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, 100%. We can go down so many wormholes with this one, completely off topic. And I think we are...
Go back to training.
We're certainly in the world now where things are becoming more tribal. And I think this is an interesting thing that doubles back on the training, even though I will go off on a bit of a tangent myself, is like you'll see people now that I speak a lot about men's rights on this show. Not a lot. It's not a men's rights podcast. It's a fitness podcast. But the one when I ever talk about men's issues, like more men commit suicide, struggles with men, I always hate the fact that I have to almost start a conversation about men going, I'm not saying I hate women, and I'm not saying I hate the LGBTQ community. I'm not saying that I hate, you big racist, sexist homophobe, right? I'm not, and I hate the fact that if a feminist spoke out or LGBT spoke out about genuine issues, they can just get into it. Whereas there is such a anti-bloke rhetoric that comes on a lot of the time these days that a man speaking about men's issues has to preface that doesn't mean that he hates other people. But my point in that is that the world becomes so much more tribal by nature, and people are growing up with this tribalism inherently taught into them. So now it's like it's either my way or the highway. You either agree with me or you're wrong, as opposed to this vein of exploration. And then people don't think that doesn't flow into studies, going back onto training. They're jaded because the people who did studies 30, 40, 50 years ago were probably seeking the truth. People who look at studies today have been taught to try and seek to be right. And I don't want my studies done by people seeking to be right. Because I want to find out where my flaws are, where I'm wrong, and I want to get better results for people. But I think more and more people, especially now, because people forget, right? People don't think about who are the people doing these jobs now. People think that everyone is going to be older and wiser than me in these positions of like intelligence. doctors and nurses and scientists and all these like really respected jobs, lawyers. But there's a bunch of 21, 22-year-old scientists right there now doing these studies that are probably either angrily pro or for Andrew Tate rather than being somewhere in the middle. You know, like, and that's going to fall, that sort of with us or against us attitude is going to fall into how they conduct studies. I think length of range work is going to be good because I like doing loads of RDLs. So I'm going to find research that supports what I think, as opposed to let's see what's happening.
Exactly. And that's you know, like it goes all the way to well-known coaches, sports scientists doing, you know, the hypertrophy effects of hip thrusts for the glutes and et cetera, transfer effects and et cetera. It goes deep into it, you know, and yes, we've got to be careful.
That one's interesting. That one's really interesting, right? Because that sums up my point exactly. A lot of the research coming out of the hip thrust versus squats debate is that squats are better for hypertrophy. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's right or wrong. And again, we can come back into the fact that squats will go into more lengthened range of the glutes than the hip thrust will, which kind of maybe falls into this lengthened range argument. But everybody I've seen do these studies or talk about these studies at the very least, are often people that like squatting.
Yeah.
Right? So it's same thing with, if you took Brett Contreras and you gave him all the research, he's going to find hip thrusts are the best for hypertrophy.
Yeah.
Right? And if people don't see flaws, I'm not saying they're not, but if people don't see flaws in that, I'm concerned for you. Because he's known as the hip thrust guy. So he's going to find a way to make the exercise that builds his living, the superior. Of course he is. And he might not even do it deliberately, because when you have a confirmation bias, you kind of lean into the stuff that you agree with without even knowing it. And that's my point about the youth. Sound like such an old fart. The youth of today being more tribalistic. I'm not blaming them. I'm not saying that they are deliberately going, I'm going to ignore that and choose this. But they're more inclined to lean into to confirmation bias. And
exactly.
without even knowing they're doing it.
Crazy, bro.
That's a big side tangent rant. But I think, but I think that's the big thing here when you look at this. And I think another thing people don't think about is, this is where I think the RTS mechanics crowd, and we spoke about this with mobility of the pros and cons of RTS last week. This is where I think they are really good, because another thing that studies don't go, I want to see the bell curve. For sake of argument, if someone says bench press is the best for hypertrophy, I don't want to say, well, we took 100 people and 90% of them had improved hypertrophy gains. I want to see the bell curve of those people. I want to see who had worse growth, who had the best growth, and I want to see a bit of an overview of what all their structures look like. Like, how many of them have really long arms? How many of them had a big barrel rib cage? How many of them had a flat rib cage? How many people of them could create a good thoracic extension? Right? Like, how many people have good stability in their upper back? Like, these things, when we look at just general study sizes, we don't take into account. So looking at this lengthened range work stuff, it's like, well, what if somebody can't get into a lengthened position? Now, that could be mobility things that we spoke about last week. It could be skill related, like we spoke about last week, or it could just be limitation in the structure. So, like, are you saying now that we're putting people into this defeatist mentality? So you can't get into lengthened range, so you can't build your legs like you want. Like, well, what are you going to do about it? You're saying shorter range work is pointless?
Yeah, no. And that's the thing. Like, yeah. I think, like, obviously, like, I love training muscles in the lengthened range, right? And just to make it clear, when we talk about the difference between a stretched position and a lengthened position, a stretched position relates to, you know, the exercise, the bottom position of the bottom of the eccentric contraction. That's a stretched position. The lengthen refers to the anatomical position of the muscle. Yeah. When, when you look at the joints that it crosses. So some muscles we have like, biarticular muscles, yeah? Muscles that cross more than one joint. So like quite simply, the bicep crosses the elbow and the shoulder. So when we're standing, the arm is down by our side, yeah? So when with our arms straight, that muscle is being stretched, but it's not being lengthened maximally. If we go on an incline bench, create the angle of the torso, the arm is hanging down. Now that muscle is still being stretched, but it's also now being more maximally lengthened because we're stretching it from the elbow joint and from the shoulder joint, which is where it crosses as well. So that's what we refer to as lengthened positions. Yeah.
Yes, and I just want to preface before you go on there as well. Just another key point in terms of these studies where these flaws are. That, as you said, with the inclined bicep curl position, is a lengthened range bicep. But if you had a dumbbell, that is not lengthened loaded. Because I'm just sitting here like this. So, so while I am in a lengthened position, I am not loading a lengthened position, which means is that actually getting the benefit? So, and also when you're looking at biarticulate muscles, is that, again, going back to your earlier point of understanding anatomy and joints and things like this. If you look at the bottom of a squat, that is a lengthened spot position in the squat. And it might be, depending on how you do it, a lengthened glute, but it ain't really a lengthened quad.
Yeah.
It's certainly not a lengthened rec fem. It ain't a lengthened hamstring because of biarticular muscles. So
why don't you, like, for the listeners that are listening, why don't you go through why don't we choose a few muscle groups, and why don't we try and explain a few different exercises that could be, lengthened position exercises, so that they have a little bit more of a understanding on the exercise. Okay, so let's go to rec fem, yeah? Quadricep, the rectus femoris crosses the knee and the quad. Okay, the only quad muscles that crosses both joints.
The knee and the hip.
What did I say?
Knee and the quad. It crosses the quad. It technically does.
Crosses the knee and the hip. So why don't you pick an exercise that stretches it, but then lengthens it even further?
Probably a rear foot elevated split squat, or if you really want to get further, a deficit split squat.
All right, cool. So why? Because if we consider the lengthened position of that rec fem, the quad, it crosses the knee and the hip. So we need to create as much knee bend and as much hip extension as possible.
Correct.
So what ways can we do that? Okay, rear foot elevated split squat, maybe a Bulgarian split squat. What was the other ones you said?
I use a deficit because I don't often say Bulgarian, because the Bulgarian will do it, but the problem is that with the Bulgarians, because it's such a high elevation, the torso comes forward, so almost then that ends up shortening the rec fem a little bit and also lengthening the glute more. That's why I like the rear foot elevated split squat or a sissy squat. Yeah, you can't load a sissy squat as much.
Yeah, I think the two ones that stand out to me when you're trying to lengthen that rec fem quad in its lengthened position would be the sissy squat and also a reverse Nordic.
That's a good shout.
Yeah, reverse Nordic. Now, can we load them with load? Can you get real mechanical tension? No. And then that's the big problem. However, building muscle isn't just about that, because if we think long-term longevity, we've got to look after the joint and the muscle, tissue quality and maybe the fascia and things like that. So can we build some, mobility, some longevity in that tissue quality by using those exercises? Hell yeah. And that's where we should be looking at using those lengthened ranges, not just on the building muscle side of things, right? Joint health, longevity.
Well, John Meadows was doing it when Bailey rest in peace before. It was cool, right? To add a loaded lengthened stretch at the end of his workouts. And I think that's a brilliant idea, because we spoke about the other day. And again, it is all down to joint integrity and structure integrity. Like, how much can you load a stretch position? Because as you said, it's the weakest position. But we said last week that the nervous system plays a role in tightness, and stretching alone, passive stretching, isn't going to be enough to keep that position. Whereas now if I can go into a loaded stretch, it means I can now go into a position that spend time in that position, get comfortable in that position, breathe in that position to calm the nervous system, let me fall into that position, but it's also not loading it as much as like my top bench press.
Yeah.
For sake of argument. Let's look at pecs as the next one, because I think pecs is one is easy, but there are a few considerations, I think. So what would you consider like your best way to get lengthened pec?
Chest fly.
Dumbbells or cables?
Either or.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, either or. I mean, you know, like if we look at the chest fly, we're going to create maximal passive tension and active tension. So why don't we talk about, okay, let's go back to that chest fly. Let's not change what I was going to talk about. Okay, cool. So in the bottom position, we're going to create maximal passive tension. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then we also have our sticking point in that bottom position. So we're going to create maximum active tension at the same time. And this is why strength curves matter. Yeah.
Go on.
so that you can choose your exercise and not get carried away with certain, banded exercises and silly exercises that don't really do a good job of creating those, tension spots, those tension sweet spots, let's call them. But man, like I love a chest fly. I don't think we're going to build, like we can build good muscle tissue using the chest fly. But the way I would build good quality muscle is, all the other 80-90% of exercises. And then I will use chest flies either to create more fatigue to the muscle, to create more of a stretch on the muscle, to create more trauma to the muscle, to finish off the exercise, or to maybe pre-exhaust the muscle before going into bench work and presses and stuff like that. So, I'm not thinking just like, oh, we got to create stretch on the muscle, right? I'm thinking like overall, how does this fit into the workout of the day? How does it fit into the workout of the week over the fucking mesocycle, macro cycle? How does it fit in? And why are we using it? Because you don't just stretch a muscle under load to build muscle. You stretch the muscle under load to, joint integrity. Maybe, hang out in that bottom position to create more muscle trauma. So there's all different methods in it. You know what I mean? So, go on, you talk. I'm getting carried away.
Yeah. No, mate, get carried away. I think the reason why I mentioned pecs, I think it's an interesting one because it's where like a lot of people will look at, as you said, this is where resistance profiles matter. And I really like that you said, I'm going to look over the week, over the month, over the mesocycle, over the macrocycle, over the block. Like this is the stuff I think that matters because I think so many people are so fixated on matching resistance and strength profiles. Now, if you can do it, in my opinion, and I'm gonna double back to this because it's a different argument for the length and range talk here. If you can do it, I think if you can match those profiles and take that close to failure through the full contractile range with one exercise, you can do a less junk volume. You can get more from less. I think on the whole, if you can do it, good idea. But people forget that you're giving exercises to Tracy from Derby. Yeah, Tracy from Derby. Susie from Slough been sacked. Tracy from Derby has been given these exercises, and you give her a reverse band Smith machine press. She doesn't have to set it up, and that creates a level of overwhelm. And being able to do 2-3 exercises to do that same job, yes, it may take longer, but it's easier for that person to do. And you might want to spend more time in a certain position. But when we look at the pecs, like the rules of I don't want to say the rules of exercise mechanics because that is bollocks, because exercise mechanics is misunderstood. But the truly understanding RTS crowd will go, well, if I look at this, the pec fly has a bigger moment arm to the pec than the dumbbell press. It also puts it in a bigger stretch position than the dumbbell press. Okay, so that must mean that it's better than the dumbbell press. And I'm like, well, yes, but you've also got to think of what else creates a bigger moment arm too. So we've got like the resistance fighter. Well, how I learned from Michael Goulden. The resistance fighter is the muscle that's doing the work. So in this case, the pec. So the thing that stops my arm falling back down towards the ground is my pec. That's resistance fighter. But then we've got the joint managers, which in this case is going to be mid-traps, external rotators, all the thing keeping the, humerus into the glenohumeral joint. Now, in that position there, in a fly, those joint managers are going to have to work considerably harder because of the greater lever. So, if you've got a beginner client who maybe doesn't have good shoulder health, do you want to spend much time in that position where those joint managers that already are struggling are going to be challenged more? Because we very few of us train external rotators, right? It's always external rotation work. Very few of us integrate external rotators. So how about we start with a press? Yes, we can get into that lengthened position still pretty well, but now we can add 10, 20, 30 kilos onto it. So if we go, oh, it's in a lengthened position, that ergo means better. Well, if I can only fly 10 kilos, but I can press 50, it's not better.
Exactly. Yeah. And what does it come down to? It comes down to the first mechanism we spoke about, mechanical tension. The more you can get through reps and sets and variation, you build muscle tissue and you build strength. The caveat is not all ranges are created equal. So, like where the weight is heaviest on our muscles, that's where we have to forcefully try and produce more force. That's the hardest part of the movement. Mechanical tension is at its highest. So when we do the bench, halfway point, moment arms at its longest point, horizontal, upper arm horizontal. Squat, it's when your thighs parallel as well, okay, horizontal to the ground. It's the hardest point of the exercise. It's where you have to create mechanical tension is at its highest point. That's where muscle growth happens, in my opinion. But it's all active tension. The muscles act as elastic bands. You stretch it, it pulls back. It wants to go back to its resting length. That extra tension is passive tension. So, okay, and if you combine the two, that's going to create more mechanical tension.
I love that, but I've got a topic for next week, and I want to give a little bit of a teaser for it because there's something really interesting about you saying the 90-degree angles is where growth happens. So my proposed topic for next week, by the way, and I want you to kind of get a little bit of a teaser of what you think. Is Joe Seedman a genius or a crackpot?
Mate, I reckon. Oh, man. Let's talk about this next week, man. Let's fucking call this motherfucker out.
Yeah. Well, you just said his 90-degree thing was right. You just said that.
DPMO, these guys piss me off so much, yeah? And you know what? I don't mind anecdotally saying, you know what? I did this stuff and it was fantastic for me. But just to disregard everything else, it's just crazy. It's like you're laughing at everyone else's expense. Every other professional, educator, coach, everyone in their field. It's like you're laughing at them and saying, your methods are so shit and outdated. They don't work. This is the best way to do it. No, it's just one method. It's just one way. There's many ways to skin the cat. But the reality, listen, let's talk about this next week.
I'm game for that. I think that'll be a great topic. But yeah, you're 100% right when it comes to doubling back on these hypertrophy stuff. We've gone through quad, we've gone through pec. Where would you stand on hamstring?
Well, I mean, again, there's some stupid studies out there, isn't it? Let's compare what there's been studies done, lion leg curl versus seated leg curl. Right, and they've shown that the seated leg curl, because you're upright and your hip is in flexion, the hamstring it's under more stretch, so it can lead to better hypertrophy gains. And they've done studies on different hip angles as well. It shows that more of a stretch can create more hypertrophy gains. But I mean, I don't know if those studies are equate total volume and things like that. I don't know. I haven't looked into them because I know on a seated leg curl, man, I can smoke heavy weight, but on a lion, I'm limited. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm in a weaker position. So
here's the interesting thing, right? Again, this is something that taking the person with a barrel rib cage and short arms and taking a person with a flat rib cage and long arms, put them in a bench press study and assume they're both the same, right? We are assuming here that the only difference between a lying and a seated leg curl is the fact that one is a slightly more lengthened position.
Mm.
When I would argue, like, what's the most obvious difference between a lying and a seated leg curl, which would make, in my opinion, I think the seated leg curl is better for hypertrophy. Like, I like a lying leg curl because I think it teaches people to posteriorly tilt the pelvis. It creates some bracing. I like training the hamstrings in a short position. However, if you said, right, you're going to create a gym where, and your job is to create a gym where you're doing a Dorian Yates style training. So you're going to do one set to failure, and it's going to all be machines, and you can pick one machine per body part. I would probably pick a seated leg curl.
Why?
But because it's more stable. So the big difference there, what that proves to me about the seated leg curl being better for hypertrophy is not that it's because it's more lengthened. It's because now we've stabilized the pelvis. Because you're more stable, you can exert more force, which means you can take a muscle close to failure, which means you can generate more mechanical tension. As opposed to the lying leg curl, where the limiting factor nearly always is, no matter how good you are at the execution, I can't keep my pelvis on the pad. So that's the reason. But I don't think the change has anything to do with the difference in length. I think it's down to the fact that you can go close to failure because you're more stable.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the problems with, some of these studies, right? Research that shows hypertrophy in lengthened positions, but, so do stable positions on machines. They show better hypertrophy as well in some research studies, right? So,
well, I think they are. I always consider. I look at, but regressions are really interesting topic, right? I think it's a topic that people don't talk about enough. People talk about programming and splits and like optimal strength profiles and resistance curves, and people don't talk about progressions. And I don't think coaches understand it, because I didn't for years. Because you're taught these progression models that are really outdated from Poliquin of like, we've talked about this before, but like the front foot elevated split squat, then you go flat, then you go rear foot, etc., etc., etc. And what I don't like about it is like, well, what's the goal? Because is a back squat a progression from a hack squat? Well, if your goal is overall strength, joint integrity, going through big range of motion, yeah, it probably is. You can more indefinitely load it. You're challenging greater, positions in the joint. What if your goal is hypertrophy of the quads? I would say the back squat's a regression, and I get on a hack any day of the week. You can get more knee flexion. You can take it to failure much safely. I think these things are nuanced, and it depends on the person. So I said something. It's a different topic from the day. Maybe we'll talk about regression as a standalone topic, but it's
just a quick one.
Yeah.
I definitely think that model of progression is based on. I would say it's predominantly based on the skill factor of an exercise. You know what I mean? Like skill being like how coordinated the individual is, like the coordination level of the exercise, along with the range of motion of an exercise, and how many joints contribute to doing that exercise. That's what I would think. When you think about it, right? If you get, like front foot to flat foot to rear foot, you slowly increase the range of motion. Yeah, if you think, go on.
Yes, but I when you're going into the split squat debate, I would always go, if your thing is high front foot split squat, so like you're almost like you're doing a step up and you're just going forward backward, then I would agree with that. But what you'll now see is that people have like a 2-inch block and go, oh, this is a regression. This is a regression from the flat. No, it's not. It's a greater range of motion. Like you're challenging the front glute more. So I would go high front foot, flat, front or rear foot, depending on the goal, deficit. Then
again, it depends on on your torso angle, though, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, if you're leaning forward on this, like I've trained females that when they do a front foot elevated split squat, they do it really well. They're very upright. That's just how they do it. As soon as I put them on, the ground, they're leaning way over. You know what I mean? And if I give them a different exercise, they're doing something completely different. So, interesting. I mean, and this is why people need to, like coaches, they need to work out what the Precise goals are, they need to have a timeline. This is A, this is B, this is how we're going to do it. We need to do some testing. We need to do some assessing, whether that's, active and passive ranges of motion, skill testing. We've got to do some testing, to start. And then we can create a program, and that program will change every single time you do it, depending on energy, mood, stress, sleep, pains, fucking all over, like soreness, all different things, isn't it? Like there's been times that I've had someone do a certain exercise because of a joint problem, and then they come in and they're tired, fatigued, they got a little bit of soreness, niggles. They just scrap it and do something completely different. You know what I mean? But yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. And I think a good closing topic to kind of go on to this, the one last thing I want to speak about, length and range. Do you know what this length and range partial stuff? Do you know the main reason why I think it's gathered steam? Is because every old school bodybuilder that doesn't like exercise mechanics and doesn't like the RTS stuff is coming out the woodwork now and slamming the methods used because it's like it doesn't fit the length and range. And the biggest thing that I've seen this is that you see a lot of people, and again, this is not a criticism. Like, I'm not judging anyone that's built a fuck ton of muscle, right? Is infinitely not infinitely smarter, but they've got something that they know, right? Like they've achieved something that very few people will achieve, have a great level of muscle mass, assisted or not assisted. But what I will look about like some of these people is that when they don't understand something, they're quick to say, it's the same people that a few years ago used to go, RTS is not for beginners. I'm like, well, actually, understanding RTS and exercise mechanics, means you can take the beginner you got in front of you and fit exercise to them, their structure, their limitations, work on strength curves to make it easier for them so you don't fall to bits in those end ranges where it's too difficult. Like, it's great for beginners. But now they're going, well, now I told you, I knew this exercise mechanics stuff was rubbish. We see all these people reverse banding stuff, but now the research says that you shouldn't be taking any load off the length and range. And I'm like, you're just showing how much you don't know about this topic. Like, no disrespect, but taking a little bit of time to learn it rather than disregarding it as new school ways would make you realize, okay, a reverse band technically takes load off the bottom where you're at the weakest position to make it harder at the top when you're in a stronger position. But it's not actually taking any load off the bottom. Because what do you do if I reverse band a pendulum squat or a leg press or a hack squat? What's the first thing I do? I put more weight on the bar. So the challenge is still equal in the lengthened position as it was before. It's just now also harder in the shortened position.
And this is where, with hypertrophy work, you have problems because, when you're working on strength or power or speed, the main focus is all about how fast you're moving a bar. So if you're moving the bar within a certain time frame, you're working on speed strength. If you're moving the body or the bar at a certain speed, you're working on power or maximal strength. Right? We can produce slower contractions. We can produce lift heavy weight but over a slower period of time. Right? The force velocity curve. Right? Like, using reverse bands or band assisted movements or chains, we got to stay within a certain time frame. Okay, so you may add the weight, but if you're moving with the bands too slow, you're not getting the training effect, so it's pointless. But obviously we don't have that with hypertrophy, right? Because hypertrophy, we're trying to lift heavy weights, go a little bit more to maximal failure, and that's where the problem comes in. I think if someone can grind more reverse banding with heavier load, then they should be doing it. But if they break down too early and they can't go to the point of near failure, work hard, feel stable, then they need to not do that exercise,
Mm. Yeah, 100% makes sense. 100% makes sense. And I think one more consideration with this length and range stuff, especially for coaches watching this, again, it's going back to that thing of remembering who's in front of you. So we've spoken a lot about mechanical tension, like a lot of people do. So you're looking at enough of a load to create a stimulus. You're looking at to be able to control end ranges. So let's assume now we're going to maybe bias length of range stuff slightly, but not eliminate short and range stuff. And you want to be able to control those end ranges to create as much tension. As you said, you're not looking for speed here, you're looking for control. And you're going to take that close to failure. So the proximity to failure is important, right? So we've got those things. I think we've established that. But there's a missing piece of this puzzle, is that recovery. I can create tons of mechanical tension, but if I can't recover from that mechanical tension, we ain't growing. So we don't grow in the gym, we go outside the gym. I think people overall understand that. Now, we got to think of, well, what is the recovery demands necessary for me now ditching all of my short range work and moving to a solely length and range program? It's going to have a greater demand for recovery. Yeah. Now, that could be fine. And if you have clients in the same way that coaches slate people for teaching Gen Pop like they teach athletes, it's the same thing here. Is if you've got an athlete who just eats, sleeps, trains, repeats, then great, try it. Try some length and range only work and see if that works. But if you've got Mrs. Jones, mother of 3, sleeps 2 hours a night, goes to work as a corporate lawyer, does a second job at night to hold down her family, like, are we now doing a training stimulus that for her is going to be too hard for her to recover from? So it could be the most perfectly optimized hypertrophy program in the world, but now she is getting no growth. If anything, she's getting a regression because she's not recovering. If I took that same person and did it more shortened range work, so they're getting in the gym, they're creating a bit of a stimulus, they're getting some blood flow to the tissues, but it's easier to recover from. They can come in, they can still train, they can not feel beaten up, and they can progress more in shortened positions than lengthened positions because of this recovery component.
And that's a massive one, like, you know, maximal recovery ability, you know, like how much can you recover from, you know what I mean, before you just overreach, you know, overtrain, fatigue too much. You need more sleep. You're not getting enough sleep. You can't stay asleep. You know, you're fucking getting depressed. Anxiety goes up. You're getting stressed about your training session, lifting heavy weights. You know, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. You're not going to build muscle like that anyway. So, yeah, good points, man. Good points.
Awesome, man. Well, I think it's been a really, really good chat. So, as always, man, where can people find you? If this is the first time they've seen an episode with Steve, where can they hear more about you?
Stephen Collins Training on all platforms. Videos coming out on YouTube. You know, yeah, bro. Yeah,
getting on the YouTube stuff. Well, subscribe to Steve on YouTube and on Instagram, and then subscribe to the podcast on all your favorite podcast channels. Self-Made Podcast, as you probably know if you listen to this already, or if you listen just to the audio version, go to YouTube, subscribe to Simon Kingston on YouTube. We're going to have more episodes with Steve, more episodes with Rob, more guest speakers. So stay tuned for more great interviews like this, mate. Pleasure as always, and I'll catch you next week.
Thanks for having me, mate. Cheers.